They will tell you it was just fire, a wooden row of shacks set ablaze by accident, by carelessness, by fate. That is the story left behind for the archives, thin as ash on the wind. But lean closer, and you will hear what the county tried to erase, that the fire did not begin with spark or ember, but with memory sharpened into vengeance, that the night itself bent, as though history had grown tired of waiting and demanded its due. It was October of 1851, Mississippi soil heavy with cotton, and the hawthorn plantation stretched wide like a scar across the land. Its mansion, pale and proud, stared with hollow windows, while behind it, tucked into the shadows, were the quarters, thin-walled cages holding more than 50 lives. The masters called them dwellings. The enslaved called them coffins. They had not yet been buried in Dot. But something had begun to move through those quarters. Not rebellion at first, not open defiance, but whispers in a tongue older than the soil itself. Scratches appeared on wood where no hand confessed. Stones shifted into circles behind the cookhouse. At night, children dreamed of heat beneath the floorboards, of voices calling from below, chanting words their mouths could not recall in daylight. And among them was Mariah, the eldest, whose eyes seemed to see through walls and through men. She told the others, "Memory never stays buried. Fire listens. Fire remembers." That autumn, Augustus Hawthorne, the master of the estate, grew restless. He invited his peers, men of land and law, 7 of them in total, to his house for a night of feasting and secrecy. They came draped in coats and arrogance, their laughter heavy, their hands already red from lives crushed under their boots. But the enslaved watched them with silence sharper than steel. They knew. They had been waiting, and on the night of the gathering, something waited with them. A present, CE, coiled in the soil, humming beneath the roots of oak trees, thirsty, patient. At 3:03, the hour of unmasking, the air shifted. The quarters glowed before they burned. And the 7 men who entered the cellar of the great house that night did not leave it alive. But before we descend fully into the truth of that fire, I must warn you, what you are about to hear was not meant for the living. Knowledge like this is not safe. Once heard, it does not let go. You are already inside the circle. By day, the plantation seemed almost ordinary to passing eyes. Cotton shimmered under the autumn sun, carriages rattled down dirt roads, overseers barked their orders. But beneath that surface lay something darker, a sickness that seeped into wood and soil. The enslaved felt it first. They always did. Eliza, a girl of just 17, began waking at night with the smell of smoke in her nostrils, though no fire burned. She tasted iron in her mouth, as though she had bitten into blood. In her dreams, she saw the quarters already blackened, roof beams glowing like molten ribs. And each morning, when she told Mariah, the old woman only nodded and whispered, "It is not dream, it is warning." Mariah had lived through too many seasons to ignore omens. She had carried songs from the coast of Africa in her bones, songs forbidden to be sung aloud, but etched into her very breath. And now, when she walked the quarters, the children followed her in silence. They watched as she drew lines in ash on the ground. They watched as she left small offerings, straw dolls bound in black thread, bones buried at the edge of the cane field, stones placed in broken circles. Each act a preparation, each act a calling. The overseer, Fitch, noticed the shift, though he could not name it. He spat over his shoulder when passing the row, muttered prayers he barely believed in. At night, his hands shook when he lit his pipe. He felt eyes on him, though none of the enslaved dared to meet his gaze. The truth unsettled him, though he would not admit it. He, the one who carried the whip, felt hunted. Meanwhile, Augustus Hawthorne busied himself with his guests. The invitations had gone out weeks before. The 7 men who would come were not just friends, but allies, judges, landowners, a preacher with fury in his sermons, men who fed on order and control. They had gathered before, in smaller numbers, for talk of power, of bloodlines, of rituals whispered in languages no church would claim. But this night was different. The enslaved knew it in their bones. They said the air itself had grown heavy, like breath held too long. And when the sun dipped low, silence fell strange across the fields. No birds, no wind, only the thick quiet of something waiting to rise. Maria pressed her hand to the earth and told Eliza, "When it comes, do not look away. The fire does not forgive cowardice." The mansion flickered with lamplight that night, its windows glowing like watchful eyes against the dark fields. Inside, the dining hall swelled with the sound of laughter, harsh, guttural, the laughter of men who believed the world itself bent beneath their boots. 7 of them sat with Augustus Hawthorne, their coats thick, their rings heavy, their bellies fed on the labor of others. Servants moved silently around the table, pouring wine, laying platters of roasted meat, their faces blank masks that hid the knowledge burning in their veins. Eliza was among them, carrying a tray so heavy her arms trembled, yet her gaze never lifted. She dared not look into the eyes of the men, though she felt their glances slide over her like grease, thick and unclean. At the head of the table, Augustus raised his glass. "To dominion," he said, his voice rich with arrogance. The others echoed, glasses clinking, wine spilling like blood across white linen. But beneath the table, their boots pressed in coded patterns. Their gathering was not mere drinking and feasting. It was something older, something that required secrecy, something that fed on shadows. By the time the last dish was cleared, the air in the room had shifted. The candles seemed to gutter though no draught stirred. A heaviness pressed down, as though the house itself held its breath. Augustus rose, gestured to his guests, and together they filed into the cellar beneath the great house. The enslaved knew better than to follow, but they listened. Through cracks in the floorboards, they caught snatches of sound, low chanting, guttural syllables that did not belong to prayer, nor to any scripture preached on Sunday. The words curled like smoke, crawling into ears, filling the quarters with unease. Even the children stirred in their sleep, whimpering, as though the voices below reached into their dreams. Maria sat by the fire. Repeat, her eyes closed, her lips moving in silence. She was listening, not to the men below, but to something deeper, the hum of the soil, the tremor of roots. When the chanting swelled, she rose and whispered, "They call shadows, but shadows answer only in kind. Tonight, their own mouths will feed the fire." At 3:03, the moment returned. Wine glasses shattered in the cellar, though no hand struck them. Flames leapt in the hearth of the quarters, though no match had touched them. A scream tore through the mansion walls, jagged and raw. The feast had ended. The reckoning had begun. It began not with flame, but with heat. The enslaved felt it first, rising through the dirt floors of the quarters, seeping into their bones like fever. The children stirred, eyes wide, whispering that the ground was breathing. Maria lifted her head, inhaled sharply, and knew the waiting was over. She told them, "Do not fear, fire remembers." In the cellar, the masters' voices had grown strained, their chanting broken by unease. Candles flickered violently, wax dripping in frantic streams. One of them, Judge Barrett, stumbled mid-word, his face pale, sweat slicking his brow. "Do you feel that?" he asked, but Augustus barked him into silence. They pressed on, though the air had thickened, though their lungs clawed for breath. Above them, the enslaved gathered outside the quarters, drawn together by instinct stronger than command. They watched as smoke curled from door frames, though no torch had been struck. The wood itself glowed faintly, embers blooming where nails met beams. And yet, nothing burned. Not yet. It was as if the fire had been called, but not unleashed, circling, waiting for its chosen moment. Inside the mansion, the men realized the cellar door would not open. The latch, once loose and creaking, now held fast, as though the wood had fused to itself. They slammed fists against it, shouted for Fitch, for anyone, but the sound that answered was not footsteps, it was laughter. Not the laughter of men, but of something vast, ancient, rising through the cracks in the stone. One by one, the lamps blew out. Darkness swallowed the room. Only the red glow from the hearth remained, and from it, sparks crawled like insects across the floor. A boot stamped on one, only for 3 more to appear. The preacher dropped to his knees, shouting prayers, but his voice twisted into screams as his robes smoldered. Back in the quarters, Eliza clutched Mariah's arm. "They are burning," she whispered. Mariah's eyes glimmered with firelight. "Not burning," she corrected softly. "Remembering." And then the blaze came alive. The quarters erupted, flames spilling upward in sheets of orange and black, devouring walls, chasing into the mansion itself. The enslaved did not run. They stood, their faces lit by the inferno, their silence unbroken. It was not theirs to flee. This was not their fire. It was the masters who screamed, trapped below, choking on smoke, clawing at stone. They began to understand too late. The fire had not come to consume the enslaved. It had come for them. The mansion was no longer wood and brick. It had become a furnace. Flames crawled through the walls like veins of molten blood, racing faster than any natural fire could. Windows cracked, bursting outward as heat swelled inside, but no air rushed in. Only more smoke, thick and black, curling back upon itself as if the house were breathing. The men inside coughed and staggered, their skin blistering, their eyes streaming tears. They clawed at doors, but every handle seared their palms raw. Judge Barrett pounded the window frame until bone snapped, but the glass would not shatter. It bent like water beneath his fists, holding him captive. And then came the sound, the low roar of the blaze shaping itself into voice. It was not words exactly, but rhythm, cadence, the echo of chants once forced into silence. The enslaved outside recognized it. It was their mother's songs, their father's whispers, the forbidden tongue that had carried across oceans. The fire sang with their ancestors' voices, and each verse tightened the walls of the house like a snare. Mariah stood at the front of the quarters, her face steady, her palms raised. The others gathered close, children pressed against her skirts. Eliza trembled beside her, but Mariah did not. Her voice lifted, low at first, then louder, meeting the song of the fire with her own. "Ashes for chains," she chanted, "smoke for sorrow, flame for blood." Inside, the preacher screamed scripture, but the words turned to ash on his tongue. One by one, the men collapsed, overcome by heat, their flesh peeling, their eyes boiling in their sockets. Augustus Hawthorne, still upright, staggered toward the center of the cellar. His lips moved in desperate prayer, but it was not to God. It was to the shadow he had tried to summon. Yet the shadow had betrayed him. The fire was not theirs to command. It had never been. The enslaved watched as the great house convulsed, beams groaning, roof collapsing inward in a shower of sparks. The scream that followed was not of men, but of the house itself, torn apart from within, its greed, its cruelty, its history of blood ignited into one terrible judgment. No one fled. No one spoke. They only watched until the fire sealed its work, until the last cry was swallowed, until the mansion became nothing but a glowing tomb of cinder and bone. And still, the fields were quiet. Not a single bird returned to the trees. Morning crept in slow, muted, as if even the sun feared to look upon what had happened. A gray mist hung over the fields, clinging low to the scorched earth. The mansion that had once towered over the land, proud and unshakable, was now a blackened husk. Its bones jutted against the sky, charred timbers collapsing into heaps of ash. Smoke curled lazily upward, carrying with it the final whispers of men who had believed themselves eternal. The enslaved stood in silence at the edge of the ruins. None spoke, for words were too small for what they had witnessed. Children clung to their mothers, eyes wide, not with fear but with something deeper, recognition. They had seen the fire's judgment. They had felt its will. Eliza stepped forward first, her bare feet sinking into the soft ash. Her hands trembled as she reached toward a fragment of wall, still warm, then drew back quickly, as if the memory burned hotter than the stone itself. She turned to Mariah. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice a whisper that carried to every ear. Mariah did not answer immediately. Her gaze moved across the smoking wreckage, to the fields beyond, to the horizon where the world stretched wide and waiting. Finally, she said, "Now the land breathes free. The question is whether we can." Around them, silence stretched long. Some wept softly. Others dropped to their knees in the ash, scooping handfuls of it through their fingers like soil, like proof that the masters were gone. But beneath the relief was a weight that pressed down on every heart. The fire had given them freedom, but freedom itself was uncertain, sharp-edged, and heavy with risk. From the ruins, a sound cracked, the groan of a falling beam, the last collapse of what had once been a throne of cruelty. The flock of crows returned at last, swooping low, circling the ruin with harsh cries. Their wings stirred the ash, sending clouds rolling across the field like ghosts. Eliza turned her face upward, her cheeks streaked with soot. "It's over," she said. But Mariah shook her head. "No, this is only the beginning. Fire ends nothing. Fire only clears the way." The enslaved looked to her, waiting, fearful yet hopeful. Beyond the ruins, the land stretched open, untamed, uncertain. What they chose to do next would shape not just their lives, but the memory of this night for generations to come. And as the mist lifted, the fields seemed to breathe again, yet heavy with secrets still buried beneath the soil. The ashes had barely cooled when the first rumors left Hawthorne Plantation. A trader passing along the river claimed he saw the night sky light up, flames leaping higher than church steeples, and swore he heard voices carried on the smoke. By the time he reached the next town, his tale had grown teeth. He told of spirits that walked out of the fire, of a house that screamed like a living beast. Word spread fast. Farmers along the county roads crossed themselves when the wind shifted east, saying they could smell charred flesh riding the breeze. Preachers thundered from their pulpits, warning that God had struck down the wicked with holy flame. Yet behind their fire and brimstone voices was a tremor, because even they could not explain the silence of the enslaved who had survived. For when townsfolk rode out to see the ruins, they found the people gathered at the fields, standing together in solemn quiet. Not one begged for bread, not one pleaded for shelter. They only stood, watching the strangers with eyes that gave nothing away. When asked what happened, Mariah alone spoke. The house burned. The fire chose. She would say no more. This silence unnerved the white townspeople more than screams ever could. Some muttered that the enslaved had conjured it themselves, calling down curses older than the land. Others whispered that the Hawthorns had been dragged into hell for the sins they carried. At taverns, drunken men swore they'd never set foot near the place, that the earth there was poisoned, haunted by fire that still glowed under the soil. But among the enslaved on neighboring plantations, the tale was told differently. In hushed voices at night, they passed it like sacred scripture. Of a fire that remembered, a fire that punished, a fire that could not be chained. Mothers soothed their children with it, fathers spoke of it as a promise, and when one dared to dream aloud of escape, another would whisper, "The fire walks with us." So the legend grew, 2 stories born from the same blaze. To the white townsfolk, it was terror, a warning to stay away. To the enslaved, it was hope, a secret proof that justice could live in the very bones of the earth. And somewhere in the still smoking ruins of Hawthorne Plantation, the wind stirred embers that refused to die. Years passed, yet the ruins of Hawthorne Plantation never fully slept. The rains came, the weeds grew thick, and vines twisted over the scorched foundation, but even decades later the soil remained black, as if stained by something deeper than ash. Children dared one another to step foot there, swearing the ground still felt warm beneath the soles of their feet. At night, travelers claimed they saw a faint glow rising from the earth, pulsing like the breath of something buried but not gone. The legend only swelled with time. Some said the Hawthorne men still wandered among the ruins, their mouths open in endless screams, their eyes leaking smoke instead of tears. Others whispered that the enslaved who perished had risen higher, their spirits now bound to the fire itself, guardians watching over the land so no master would ever claim it again. In the towns nearby, parents used the tale to hush restless children. Behave, or the fire of Hawthorne will come for you. But among the descendants of those who had endured the plantation's cruelty, the story carried another weight. It was told not with fear, but with reverence. Around hearths and campfires, they spoke of Mariah, the woman who stood unbroken, who called down a blaze that no chains could hold. They spoke of Eliza, who walked through the ash and declared it over. They spoke of a night when the cries of the oppressed became the song of the fire itself. And as generations came and went, that story became more than history. It became warning. It became prophecy. For whenever cruelty tried to root itself in the land again, whispers rose. The fire remembers. Even scholars who came years later to study the ruins confessed uneasy dreams after setting foot on the grounds. They wrote in journals of hearing chants on the wind, of seeing flickers of red deep within the soil at dusk. One wrote that he woke in the night to the sound of crackling timber, though no fire burned. He left the county the next morning and never returned. To this day, the ruins stand silent, draped in moss and shadow. But on certain nights when the air is still and the moon is hidden, the silence breaks. A crackle rolls across the field. A glow stirs in the dark, and those who have heard it will tell you this. The fire of Hawthorne does not die. It waits.